I'm going to start with a story. Several years ago, I was an assistant principal in middle school, and I was busy doing what middle school principals do. I was dealing with kids that were swearing, dealing with kids that were tardy to class, walking around, checking in with all the kids, talking to the teachers, and doing all those things that kind of make being an assistant principal fun, believe it or not. One day, a call came into my office, and that changed everything. Changed my philosophy on how to deal with behavior, and it really got the ball rolling in a number of new ways for us, and that's the story that we'll talk about today. What happened that day is a call came into my office from one of our teachers that said that a student had threatened her life. That's a pretty serious call. That's a little bit more serious than a student that might be late for class. I wasn't exactly sure what to do with that, but what I knew is, boy, if a student threatens to kill a teacher, that's a pretty big deal. That usually results in things like expulsion, police involvement, all those things. That particular day, I didn't know, at that moment, I didn't care who the student was. What I knew is I had a staff member in my building that was scared, that was threatened. And I knew that that would spread very, very quickly through the building and through the district and potentially even bigger than that. So I didn't know what to do. So I consulted the good book of Discipline Policy 101, and it said right there, if a student threatens somebody, I have to kick them out of school and I have to go to expulsion. So I contacted the superintendent and I went through all that process. After I started doing that, I started to figure out that there was more to the story than just a student who threatened somebody. It turns out that this particular student drew a floor plan of the teacher's house. It was completely inaccurate. They'd never been to the house before. It had a stick figure that we know was the student because next to the stick figure on the piece of paper, it had a little circle and it said me, and then an arrow pointing to the stick figure. So pretty good evidence on that. But that student walked through the house, shot the dog, that was in the picture, walked up the stairs and killed the teacher. Okay? The stick figure had a gun in her hand. We never would have found out that this even happened because during class, this particular teacher's class, the student was talking, and the teacher during this math test asked the student to be quiet. The student got mad, drew the little floor plan and all of that stuff, and then started talking again, and then the teacher picked up the paper, didn't look at it, crumpled it up and threw it in the recycling bin. After class, it would have been over right then. After class, that student walked out in the hallway and doing what students do, middle school kids for sure, started bragging to her friends. I drew a floor plan. I said I was going to kill this teacher. Didn't take long for kids to start singing like canaries. It happens, right? Middle school kids are notorious for it. They like to tell on each other. So we found out really quick. We found that floor plan. We got the ball rolling, like I said. Looked a little bit more into the history of this particular student. The student was an at-risk student, part of our at-risk program in that school. Had never been in any real trouble before. I think one time she hit a kid on the bus because he said something inappropriate to her. It's probably legitimate. So we didn't really know, is this expulsion road that we have to go on, is that the right thing to do? Started talking to the teacher, the one that was threatened. She was upset, she was angry, she didn't know what to do. At that particular time, she was upset and angry enough that, yeah, expulsion is the right thing to do. So we went through the expulsion process. We worked with the family. This incident happened mid-year, it might have been in February or so, that real fun time of the school year in Wisconsin. We went through the expulsion process. Of course, she was expelled. She was expelled for the rest of her 7th grade year and all of her 8th grade year. Not to be welcomed back into our school ever. What do we do with kids after the damage is done? Okay, we work a lot. Every one of us in this room works a lot on school culture. school climate. We want kids to feel safe. We want staff to feel safe. But what do we do when a mistake is made? Do we expel them for a year and a half? Or do we try to fix that problem? I was the assistant principal. That was my job to deal with that behavior. And I really, really struggled personally with the right road to go. After the expulsion hearing, after that expulsion order was put out there, I met with our superintendent and our hearing officer. And I just started talking about this thing that I've been learning about, actually through Aaron up here. This thing called restorative justice. I hadn't heard a lot about it just yet. But I knew that it might be something that we were interested in. When I mentioned it to the hearing officer, he jumped on board really quickly. He said, that is the right thing to do. I'll support anything that you come up with. So our at-risk teacher and I came up with a plan. It was definitely kind of out in the left field. It was different than anything that we'd ever done. But what we did is we contacted Weston High School. Some of you may be familiar. Just a while ago, the principal there, John Klang, was shot and killed. This incident, this threat, happened a year later. Okay, so it's still pretty fresh. We called Weston and we set up a field trip. And we brought this particular student during her expulsion. We brought her out to that high school. We met with staff that over a year later still cried when they told us the story. We stood in the spot where John Klang was shot and killed. We saw a mural painted on the wall that the students did to try to cover up the bullet holes. We talked to a secretary that her job was to lock down the school, but she saw the pictures of her 3 kids on her desk, and instinct kicked in, and she went and hid it instead. So we heard those personal stories. We we looked at the memorial that they built next to the school for Principal Klang. And then finally, we met with 4 high school seniors. High school seniors can say something to a middle school kid that I can't say, I can't get away with. Okay? It was a real intense meeting. Those high school seniors, many of whom were in the classroom right where this all happened, in a very tight-knit school, talked to the student about how dumb it was to draw a floor plan, to say you're going to kill a teacher because you talked too much during a math test. Where's the connection there? That's what finally helped the student, the one that we were dealing with, realize that what she had done was wrong. Up until that moment, I think she was mad because we kicked her out of school for a year and a half. This is an at-risk student. What's going to happen to her if she's out of school? And what school around here is going to take her if she threatens to kill people? So is there a better way? We think there is. The restorative part of this, we went through that day, that field trip, and we all cried. I think I cried about 5 times that day. It was one of the most intense days I've ever had. When we got back to school, the next step was to set up some conversations. We didn't want the student. By then, the teacher was at this point too. She was working with us on this. None of this would have happened if we didn't have some support there. The teacher that was threatened wanted an opportunity to talk to the student, wanted to have pictures of her family. You know how kids sometimes look at us? We're not human, we're just teachers, right? This teacher had pictures of her family, her husband, her dog, the golden retriever. And they sat and they talked, and they went through everything. They questioned each other, they apologized to each other. Everybody owned the whole story. In the end, the student missed a month of school because she was expelled. But when she completed this process of going out to Weston, coming back and having that conversation and mediating between her and the teacher, we welcomed her back to school. We switched her schedule. We did all those things that we needed to do. But that was a different way to handle the situation. Instead of kicking a kid out for a year and a half and making her the high school's problem when she went to her freshman year, we brought her back to our school, got her back into the school community, and helped her learn. What we're going to talk about today, we've got a whole bunch of stories that we're going to tell as we kind of talk through our story. We believe that there is a better way. There's a better way to deal with student behavior. It works great with special education students, the ones that are challenges with behavior. It works great with at-risk students. It works great with kids of all different ethnicities. It works great with your regular kids that just don't get in trouble very often. Okay? For some of you, what we talk about today may be common sense, maybe something that you've heard of. You might be doing some of this stuff in your school. For some of you, this will be a real paradigm shift for you. And we hope that we can help you kind of think through that and get you a little bit excited about the possibilities of what could happen. So my name is Paul Herrick. I'm the principal of the middle school here in DeForest. I'm going to introduce Aaron Tarnutzer and turn it over to him for a little while.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll still be clapping by the end. I'm glad that you're here, and it's funny to be standing here. As Paul said, a lot of people here. The last time that I wore this particular outfit was at my brother's wedding, and I was the best man. So I will spare you those details, but hopefully you're as good an audience as they were. I think what we have to share for you today, we're going to try to give you a lot of specifics, but more than anything, Paul and I are storytellers, as you can tell. And that Weston story that he tells about that experience comes to life every time he tells it for me. I have some too. There'll be some that are a little bit more funny, but that was a good way to remind us how significant the work is that we all do. I want to give you a quick overview of what solar is. There's a few things that jump out when you think about this model. The first thing is that it's solution-oriented. We spent yesterday diving into looking at understanding the function of behavior so that we can solve the problem instead of punish the problem. So you're going to hear a lot of things about that as part of this model. It's very important. The other thing we're going to introduce you to, and for some of you, will be the idea of differentiated discipline. And what differentiated discipline means to us is that we have common expectations for all students. But what's different is how the problem is solved. And it's different based on a student's strengths and needs, and really, what is the function of that behavior? What do we want the student to learn from that experience? Because while two behaviors may look the same, the causes of the behavior may be very different, and typically they are. So that our response needs to be different, whether we're in a classroom, whether we're on a playground, or whether we're in the office. And so that's an important concept to think of. We take it another step further with the idea of choice. And we really want students to own the solution. Accountability, you'll hear a lot about that this morning. And then one of the ways that we do that is by having them have some choice in how they resolve the problem. So we give them options, but all these options meet the same learning target. So that's something that is integral to this model. It is restorative. We want to attend to the needs not just of what some term the offender, but also the victim, the school community that's harmed when a behavior happens, that teacher that Paul spoke of, her family that's been impacted. We want to consider everybody and all their needs, because often we deal with the student and they go away, and yet somebody's still really hurting, and we need to resolve those issues, and we do it in a restorative way. This is, for some people, a paradigm shift, although any group of people that's going to spend a day talking about functional behavioral assessments, you are the choir. I understand that. You don't look at behavior in a functional way and spend all day diving into forums enthusiastically and then come here and go, I just want to expel kids. That's not who you are, but know that we hope to give you some information and maybe remind you that there is a better way, and we'll give you some ideas on what you might want to do with that. So as we go through the day, we're going to introduce you to this better model, but we got to get some things sort of off the table. And we know, as people that have worked at various levels in schools, that there's a lot of challenges that we all face. And these challenges seem to be growing at an exponential rate. And instead of us sort of always having that in the back of our head as we present this morning, what we want to do is to get those things out, sort of unload your baggage. What are those things? What are those barriers that you encounter on a daily basis when you think about school discipline? What are the challenges we face? What holds us back? And we want to provide just a few minutes for you to talk at your tables about these big school-wide initiatives and related to discipline. What holds you back? What is getting in your way? So we'll provide a few minutes. I will say this, I'm not a good shusher. So I'm going to lead you through an activity. How many of you are PBIS schools? Raise your hand. All right, excellent. So we're going to do a quick voice level activity. And what I want you to do is to count with me. We're going to start at 0 and we're going to count up to 10. Now 0 is completely silent. When we're at a 0, you can't hear anything. When we're talking at a 1, it's like a whisper. So we're just not very loud. And then 2 is kind of like you're working with somebody at your table and you're like, hey, what do you think about this? Maybe while I'm even talking, right? And I don't even notice. 3 is a typical kind of conversational level. And we'll work our way all the way up to 10, which 10 used to be, for me, when the Packers win the Super Bowl. 10 will be when the Brewers win the World Series. So, yes, whatever motivates you, because the other night was not motivating for any of us. So I want you to count with me, just count with the numbers, and we'll get gradually louder. And at 10, I mean, let's kind of scare some people. I think it'd be fun to kind of scare anybody out there. Okay, start with 0. That was a test, by the way, just to see if you got that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10! That was fun. Thanks. So the way that we're going to use this is I will give you, and Paul had no idea I was going to do this, by the way. It was bothering me all day yesterday. So I'm going to give you a number to use at your talking level. We're also going to use a timer to count down so you can see that as a visual. And we will count down from 5 to 1 when it's time. And then I need you at a voice level 0, boys and girls. So feel free to talk. You might even get up to a voice level 4, even 5 if you're really excited. Get all that stuff out bent. What are those obstacles you face? Thank you. Thank you, boys and girls, for having a voice level 0. I'm very proud of you. Nice job today. Okay, if you could get out all of the barriers that you may have in 2 minutes, then I'm coming to your district, because we've got a lot more than 2 minutes worth at our district. Here's some of the things that I'm sure you came up with, and I'm sure you had a few more. You know, we have a lack of resources that is shrinking by the second, if you look around. That's an obstacle that we have to face. We have inconsistent parent support. There was a time where I felt like I was spending a good chunk of my day justifying decisions that we were making as a school staff in the best interest of children with parents. And honestly, I don't blame them, because some of the things that we were doing didn't make a lot of sense. We also have competing initiatives. You've got this over here, and we're doing grading, and we're doing PBIS, and then we've got Common Core standards, and it seems like we're always kind of fighting ourselves for what's going to be the best thing at the right moment. And that can often wear on us. Sustainability. We develop programs that are really great when we have the right people leading the way, but when they're gone, so is the efforts. And we have to restart. And that often happens. We often don't use data to make decisions. That's one of the great things that has changed over time as we look at RTI and PBIS is looking at data to make decisions. And that's something that some people love. I happen to be one of those people, love the data, and some people it's torture. So you just kind of have to find the right people to do the right things. And another thing that is really becoming prominent and was a real eye-opener for me is talking about behavior gaps. And when we analyze our discipline data, or we look at our special ed data, and we see the dramatic, disproportionate over-identification of African Americans for disabilities, for discipline referrals, that's a concern. That's something that we need to address. When we see that 80-some% of our referrals, discipline referrals, are for boys, we can't ignore that we need to do something different, that we need to try something different. When we look at the socioeconomic status and how discipline and special ed identification varies with social economic status, that's something that we need to look at. Even though it's hard to look at, we need to look at and acknowledge. So, somewhat by accident, as Paul and I were working together and kind of stumbled onto some of these ideas that you're going to hear about in a well-developed way that didn't happen overnight, by the way. I kind of use the analogy that, you know, it's kind of like we were, a couple of guys decided we wanted to form a band, and because we liked music, and so we're playing in our garage. And it's really fun, and we really like being together. And one day some guy walks by and says, hey, that's kind of good. Kind of like that. And we're like, yeah, and we like it too. I'm glad you like it too. And people have kind of gravitated towards us because it feels right. It feels right. It makes sense ethically for us. But it also works, and we're going to show that. The other thing that has happened is this model will address many of these issues. Somewhat consciously and somewhat unconsciously. So we're hoping that maybe some of those barriers that you've just unloaded in 2 minutes that we can address for you today. But the fact is that we're kind of doing it wrong. And no offense to anyone who has a real point system or a leveled system, 3 strikes kind of system. But it's probably not working for you. If you really look at it, it's probably not changing behavior, and it's probably not making your schools any safer. We're doing it wrong. And one of the things that we do is we kind of have a traditional model, kind of an old way of doing things. That there's a copy of this in your materials as well, because this is pretty small, but this is what Paul and I were used to, and you're probably used to too. Problem behavior happens. You've established the school-wide expectations, whatever those are. Call them rules, call them expectations, whatever they might be. Student doesn't meet the expectations. in the classroom you do one thing, you have a classroom management plan, out of the classroom, kicks to the office. That in-classroom management plan isn't sufficient, it heads down to office intervention, where the administrator has a magic wand, they wave, and they send the kid back and all is well. Well, in actuality, what they do oftentimes is they have a list of punitive consequences from which to choose. Actually, when Paul and I worked together, there wasn't any choice. It was first strike, this happens. Typically, for most offenses, this would be a detention, some kind of time spent somewhere away from other people, a timeout, if you will. And then you send them back. And then if it doesn't get better and they come back to you again, well, that's strike 2. So detention didn't work, so we have to try a bigger punishment. And that bigger punishment is going to be in-school suspension. So let's take a student who is struggling with behavior in class and remove them from the learning environment. Yeah, they'll miss some of the work that they would have. They'll get disconnected from their peers, but they'll learn because it's boring in-school suspension. So if we can just do that, that'll work. So then you send it back. And now we're in January, and we've got strike 3, they're back. Well, we tried detention, in-school suspension, and we got to do it. It's out-of-school suspension now. That will teach them. We'll inconvenience their parents a little bit. We'll hope that they're not playing video games when they're at home. Maybe their parents will put them to work, like, good parents would do. Note the sarcasm. And that'll fix them. Okay, so now we're in February, the armpit of the school year, and we're sitting there, and we got them again. We're staring at each other, and what do you have left? And the question is, now what? Now what do we do? We've kind of run out of options. Are we going to expel a kid for repeatedly being disruptive in class? Well, of course not. Meanwhile, they've not learned anything other than don't get caught. That's sort of what they've learned. And they probably don't like us very much either, but we can live with that. So what we want to do is to show you kind of a new way, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But to illustrate this for you and to try to bring it to life a little bit, is I want you to take some time. There's a handout in the binder. It's on the back side of one of the last pages, if not the last page of our section. And it's got a grid there. And what I want you to do at your table, and you can work with as many people as you want, what I want you to do is just to spend a couple minutes on the top box. And I want you to ask yourself, it says in-box table discussion. So starting with that top 2 boxes, that first row, what I want you to do is to spend some time developing what are those traditional consequences for two common behaviors that you often encounter. One is tardy to class. What do you do when a student is tardy to class in a traditional model? And jot down a few things and talk about it with your colleagues. What is a typical traditional approach for tardy to class? And on the next column, what is a typical response to insubordination? A word a teenager has never used in their life, but we like to use. So talk about those 2 things. We'll give you a couple of minutes. Feel free to have a voice level 4, maybe even 5 with enthusiasm. Thank you.
Okay, so what's the typical context? Awesome.
That we want. We know the objective that we want students to learn by the end of the lesson or the end of the unit. This is no different. If a student makes a mistake, what do we want them to learn from it? I just had a conversation with one person about, this seems great for middle school. Again, we talk middle school all the time. Does it work for elementary and high school? Absolutely it does. You have to tailor what those solutions are, but it works. You have to know your audience. For example, I know that when I work with a middle school student, the student cheats on a test. I know that they probably know already that that was wrong. Okay? And the standard question that we ask students is, do you know that that was wrong? Of course they do. That's why they were sneaky about it. That's why they wrote their little cheat sheet really small. Okay? They know the difference between right and wrong, but the chance of getting away with it and being successful on that assignment or that test far outweighed what the possible consequences might be. So what really do we want them to learn? What is the lesson that we want for them? Is it really about cheating or is it about honesty? Again, link it back to the character traits. When we talk about honesty, how does that apply to where they're going? What are their goals? Get to know the student. You know, I don't know how many students that are regulars in the middle school office, when they ask them what they want to do when they're an adult, they want to be police officers. I don't know why that happens, but it's true. We get a lot of those. And so you talk to them about, well, if you punched the student, can police officers just go around punching students? Of course not. So, you know, you link to that goal that they have. Okay? Again, it's not rocket science. It's just how you fit these things together. So the learning piece, and Aaron mentioned this before, the lesson shouldn't be giving them an opportunity to be upset about what they did to the point where they're just going to figure out how to be more sneaky next time. I know that's what got me through middle school and high school. Okay? Is how can I be sneaky about it? What we really want is we want those kids to learn tools, strategies, options for if they do make a mistake so that it doesn't happen again. Okay? So, one of the foundations of solar, again, pretty simple. Mistakes are teachable moments. Let's not just punish everything that happens. Let's teach them the right way. Okay? And that's where the art of teaching comes in. How many of you have well written out, documented, maybe a purchased curriculum that you teach in your classrooms? Okay? A lot of you probably do. I know in our school we've got this great math curriculum. Okay? The teachers are awesome. They deliver it very well. But it's not just the curriculum that's written on the page, it's how they do it. It's how they connect to the kids. It's the art of teaching. It's the art of discipline management. Okay? How you teach those kids. Another foundation, we can't expect positive choices until we teach positive choices. You know what I mean? Not until we teach positive choices. Same thing we said before. You can't expect respect until you teach it. Okay? Never forget that one. Now, very simply, when we're talking about the learning piece, so we're developing a solution for solar, when we develop that learning piece, we want there to be an objective. Okay? What is it we want the kids to learn? I already mentioned that. The next piece is you want that to link back to that culture of character. There was one school that I worked with that was pretty interested in this type of philosophy, at least the LAR part of this, the learning, accountability, and restoration. They didn't have the culture part figured out. In fact, the learning and accountability part weren't figured out very well. There was a student that was picking on a cognitively disabled student and really, frankly, harassing him in the hallway. So they came up with a plan. And really, in theory, it sounds pretty good. They had the student work with or go into the CD room with that particular student and spend time with him, talk with him, build a relationship, which is great, and play the Wii. That's what they had in the room. That part was kind of nice. It worked well for the student. But what didn't work so well is the student that made the offense was out telling his friends, I didn't have to do math today because I got to play video games. Okay, what did you learn from this? You know, there was no accountability for getting the math done or to make up any time that he missed in these other classes. So you got to make sure you have all those pieces in there. But the learning piece has to go back to that culture of character. And again, I don't think we need to talk a lot about the last one that's up there, but we do need to make sure that we kind of refer back to the whole conversation yesterday, is why did the behavior happen? Okay? When we try to just give a consequence without understanding the function of the behavior, it probably isn't going to work. That's the old way. We give the same consequence to every student. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work. So, do we really want to punish the behavior, or do we want to treat the reason why it happened? Okay, that's kind of a key piece that you should think about. And then we can't fix it until we know it's broken. Another simple foundation for what solar is all about. One example of this one, and again, this is a great middle school. You could do this at elementary, it would look different. You could probably do it at high school, it would look a little bit different. But one thing that we've done in the past is the sub-greeter idea. How many of you right now, or within the last 10 minutes, have been thinking, oh my goodness, the notes that are going to be on my desk when I get back to school tomorrow, because Johnny did this and Lucy did this, and there's that list of kids, right? I remember when I was a teacher, I taught 8th grade. I remember when I knew I was going to leave, or even if I was sick, and I went into school and got everything ready, because everybody loves getting those lesson plans ready. I remember writing on my whiteboard in my room, if any names get written down, your consequences that I normally would have in my classroom, double. You know, like that's going to work, right? Then I have to spend more time with those kids when they come back, or when I come back to school. And I'm probably still sick. I'm certainly sick of some of the behavior. So let's try something different. That's what we thought. In our old school, what happened, the way the rules were written, if a student was making mistakes when there was a sub, they automatically had some in-school suspension time the next day. So not only did they get kicked out of class, then they miss all their classes the next day. So now they're further behind, and it's even more work for the teacher. Okay? So we tried coming up with something a little bit more creative. We developed our sub-greeter program. We worked with the students. Again, they had to give back to the school in some way. They had to do some sort of research on why subs are important to our school. Because they don't get it. They don't understand why. They had to do some sort of research on like what are the systems, what are the things that subs are responsible for. So do they know how to get around the school? Do they know who to talk to if they need to make copies? Do they have a password to get on the computer? All those little things that kids don't really think about, we wanted them to understand. With the whole idea being, again, the learning piece, they aren't connected to the subs. They're connected to you. They've built the relationship to you. They know what you would expect when you're in the classroom. For a sub, they don't know that. They don't have the relationship, so they can get away with more. I certainly was one of those kids. So the learning piece that we want is we want them to understand that subs are teachers. They're doing an incredibly important job. We have a lot of subs out around the state right now, with all of you not being in your buildings. So when the research part was done, and they wrote a little essay on who they are, and how I'm really not a bad kid because I was throwing spitwads or whatever in class yesterday. Really, I'm interested in reading, I play basketball, all these different things that make a student an individual gets put into this report, this document. And then we set up a time, we talk to the parents, we get everything set up. We said, how many days do you think you should be the sub-greeter? Usually students, they think you're really mad at them, so they say things like, I don't know, a month? And I'm thinking, how about 3 days? And so they come in, they dress up a little bit nicer, they come in, we make copies of that packet. They, will at least tuck their shirt in that day. And we'll give them a map of the school. These are the rooms where the subs are. You go around, you introduce yourself to the sub, you talk through that packet. If it happens to be the same sub that you made the mistake with, maybe you apologize, and you build that relationship. When we started doing that at our other school, and it's a simple thing, it was really no work for me, it was work for the student, it was on their shoulders. When we started doing that, the subs would come in at the end of the day and they said, oh, that was the cutest thing. Johnny came in and apologized to me, and he looked so nice today, and had all those, like a real positive thing to say. And then we didn't run out of subs anymore. They liked coming to our building. Okay? So again, what do we want them to learn? That certainly would be one of the choices that we would give students when you go back to school tomorrow. Now, the last kind of inbox scenario that I've got for you is to take it, again, kind of that step forward. If you, again, look at those same behaviors, tardy to school, insubordination. What do you really want kids to learn? When they're tardy to school, do you know why they're tardy? You figured that out? And if you have, what do you want them to learn to get them there? Are they tardy to just your class, maybe not to school, but it's third period and they're late every day? Why? So just take a minute, talk at your tables, write a couple of things down, and talk about the learning piece. What do you want kids to learn from the behavior that they're showing?
And what it does to affect their reputation. Right. Boundaries. It's nice that you care. Yeah, it's nice that you care. Or to prioritize themselves. No, it's really hard.
When I came in, they came back way.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah, that's where I sat. What about information? So they need to learn to not be, you know, Are you going to take our picture?
Yeah.
All right.
I know. I want you to do that.
Oh, I'm coming this way. She can. No. I don't want to be the only person standing up.
5 and a 4 and a 3 and a 2 and a 1. And please have your voice level at 0. Thank you so much. Yeah, what do you want a kid to learn that's tardy to school or tardy to class? You want them to learn how that impacts the classroom. You want them to learn more efficient ways to get around. Insubordination, you want them to learn how that impacts you. The idea of what you want them to learn always relates back to those expectations. But now as we move into accountability, we want to remind you that differentiation is not just for curriculum. That just as we ask ourselves the question that hooked me with PBIS, you know, what do we do when a kid doesn't know how to do fractions? We teach them. What do we do when a kid doesn't know how to behave or misbehaves? We punish. That was an eye-opener for me. This should be an eye-opener for you in the sense that how we hold that student accountable will depend on that individual student, and that we can differentiate that based on their age, developmental level, their strengths, their needs. So you're not going to take a kindergartner who threatens to hit their teacher to Weston. Okay, please don't do that. Not a good plan. But you may have them meet with someone to talk about how that felt and just use those words. And maybe you can use visuals for certain kids. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can tell through stories. But at the end of the day, what accountability means is fixing the problem and that student owning the problem. Not you as an educator owning the problem and feeling responsible for fixing it, but it's really put back on them to solve it. But that's their responsibility. We're going to guide them, especially at younger ages, but we're going to help them do that. We're going to help them fix it. Because if we just focus on a punitive model, what we're going to end up doing is just alienating the student from the learning environment. So again, it doesn't accomplish anything, but we can say we did it, and that's often. And I've been criticized, I'll be honest with you, especially when we started doing this, and there's people here from my school as well, that would say that sometimes it feels like you're not doing anything. But what accountability looks like is very different, because you're accountable not just for that behavior, but that also the harm that it caused. You're accountable to the victims of what happened. And the accountability comes alive with the procedures. Those are the steps. As you heard some of these examples that we've shared today, I hope you've given some thought to what that looks like in practice. To think about the fact that a student's gonna develop a packet of information for a guest teacher. We call them guest teachers at my building. I think that makes us a little better. Not subs, they're guests. Invited in so you can be here. But think about the time that they put in. Or they could have been sitting in their classroom, trying to sleep without you noticing, in school suspension, trying to sleep without you realizing that they're sleeping and getting all their work done. And then you can say you did that. So what the accountability looks like is a little bit different in this model. I'll give you an example of a situation where kind of the old way at a different school than I'm at now. A student has a sucker in the hall, teacher sees it, says, you need to throw that away right now, no food in the hall. The kid bites off the sucker and throws away the stick. Okay, I would have done that. That's what I would have done. In fact, if you would have asked me as an adult to do that, I'd have been like, okay, and I would have thrown it away. But that was not what the teacher told him to do. So a student gets, pulled up to the office, and he did not, insubordination, did not listen to me. And I think for me, it makes me think of the idea that the best solution is going to be the one that works. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. The best intervention is the one that works. Bringing them up, and now we've got a huge to-do over a sucker, didn't fix anything. And it didn't hold the student accountable. When really, we just have to just take a step back sometimes and realize, just going, you know what, I asked you to throw it away, and that's not what you did. Do you see how that is? And then you can have a conversation. That could have taken care of it. And that was the best intervention at that time. So I think that accountability comes through the different choices that you're going to give them. And these are procedures. They're the things that people will do to be accountable. But you have to define who they need to be accountable for. If a student harasses another person, they need to be accountable to that victim. I had a situation where math teacher, excellent math teacher, uses clock partners. Okay, so you go through the clock, 1 through 12, you've got a different partner for each time. Well, this boy thought it'd be really funny to say, I did her at 6 o'clock. Yeah, I'm always doing her at 6 o'clock. And this girl ends up coming to me and saying how horrible she feels, how much this has impacted her. So I knew I could just punish him and send him away, but I wasn't attending to her needs. And so we ended up doing was holding a restorative conference, which essentially is a meeting where people get together and they're able to describe how that behavior impacted them. The offender listens to it and then makes it right, repairs the harm that was caused. And so I had the parents come in, both sides, and I had to push one of the parents a little bit because he was, this is the father of the girl who was receiving this sexual harassment, and he was being a little too gentle. And so I pushed him to say, how were you affected when you heard that? When your daughter came home and told you that this boy was saying these things to him, how did you feel? What went through your head? And he was able to open up, and this boy listened. I was able to see what happened when this girl said, I used to hate math. Used to hate it, and now I have this great teacher, and math has been my favorite class this year. And now I started not wanting to go because of what you were doing. I saw the father of this boy that was harassing this girl cry and say, I am sorry that my child did this. This is not the child I wanted him to be, and I am confident he will learn. And finally the boy shared how he understood that this was harmful to her. And he was able to, more eloquently than I could ever do, describe that he got it. he knew that she was harmed and it was his fault. So he was accountable to her. And so that essentially is, when you look at that flow chart, these choices all need to make sure that they hold the student accountable. But it's not just time and effort, it's also accountability towards the victim. And that's essential to that. Giving them the choice that you see in the model is what really facilitates that. Students take ownership when you give them some options. Then they feel like that's something they've committed to. Students will pick the easiest option for them. They will pick the easiest option for them. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some students love to get on the announcements, but they're learning through that experience. They're making an announcement about safety, don't pull people's chairs out, for example. Other kids would never do that. They need a different experience. So you have that variability, and the student takes over that. I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip this one inbox, just so that we can make sure we get into restoration a little bit, since I could talk all day about that. So being accountable requires that the offender repairs the harm that was caused. And that harm is often caused towards a lot of different people. This is where we get into restoration, because we always focus on the offender and not enough on the victim, as you've heard me say many times. And so all of you have been victims of behavior in your classrooms. And I ask you to really think about, how many times do you feel like you've been given what you need from that situation? And in the end, one of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that it's better to repair the harm that was caused now than rebuild later. We can all think of students who, for whatever reason, we've lost them. And when we've lost them, they're not connected to our school at all. We can think of people who are victims and dread coming to school every day because that harm was never repaired for an incident. It's not easy, it's not simple, but yet it is really important. So the thing that I want you to remember too with all of this is that we have to differentiate how restoration happens. You have realized some things about me already this morning. One of the things is I love to talk. I love it. I love it when you guys are listening to me. This is great. Some people struggle finding the words to do that. They could not participate in a restorative conference in a meaningful way. And I've worked with young kids that are part of that too. And I've noticed that you have to differentiate based on what the student's able to do. That's really important. So we consider those needs of the victim as well. And I'll give you a quick story about that. A teacher comes to me and says, I need your help, crying. Here, some students had taken a picture of her in her classroom working with other students. So as you often do, she's over helping some students bent over. Some students took a picture of her backside with them making gestures and posted it on Facebook. And she came to me feeling awful. And so I knew the harm that had been caused to her. And I knew that was really hurting her. And that I could punish the kids all day long, but in the end, she needed something more from them than just knowing they did their time. And so I did facilitate restorative conferences with them. And I can remember one of them very well because it speaks to the art of this work, is that it was going bad. It was a restorative conference that was not going well. And the reason was this girl was so mad at her mother, who was in the room, because she's a teenage girl. So she's mad at her mother. And so at one point I called it out and I had to stop it. I said, this is about you giving back to your teacher. This isn't about you being mad at your mom. And she turned to that teacher and tearfully said, I can't imagine how embarrassing that was to you. I can't imagine how that felt for you at your house, talking to your husband about what had happened. I'm so sorry. I care about you as a teacher. You've always been good to me. And I feel awful for what I did. No amount of suspension would have made that happen. So that's where that restoration comes in. Also, a lot of times what you'll see is that you're repairing harm to the bigger school community. And I think some of the examples we've shared, you can see that impact. when Paul talks about the Phi-Ed example. That has an impact on all of us. That's a huge, huge issue. When we have issues of vandalism in the bathrooms and kids do projects where they go to a younger grade and they share, look at our custodians, they're amazing people. Do you know what they have to deal with in our everyday? We can do better for our custodians. Those kids don't know that those boys had plugged a toilet the day before. They don't know those things, but yet you're giving back. And how you give back just depends on the developmental level and abilities of the student. We've got 5 minutes left, and I do want to give you some time to put it all together, because we're really good at giving you a lot of ideas at conferences, right? And you get back, and you guys are listening, so I think you're into this a bit. But then you're going to go back to school tomorrow, and you're going to be like, okay, now what? So Paul's going to kind of close things up and share some things about that.
All right, putting this all together, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions that you might have right now at the end. And if not, we'll certainly be around today, so if you have questions. And also on your tables, we left some cards there. If you have any follow-up questions, you want one of us to give you a call and talk through anything. Like Aaron said, we're both really good at talking. Just yesterday, one of our staff members that's here jokingly said, "Oh, I see you're on all day tomorrow," thinking it was going to shake me, and I said, "Come on, I can talk all day." And she knows that. She's been in my staff meetings. So we're going to try to close things up here. Putting this all together, I believe in your packet, in the PowerPoint notes that you have in there, it's got a lot of just kind of questions to think about as you consider, what do you want kids to learn? How do you want to hold them accountable? What are the questions you need to ask yourself when you're developing a solar solution? Again, it isn't rocket science, and I've said that term a number of times this morning. This isn't hard. The hard part is figuring out how are you going to be creative? How are you going to get outside of the box that we've always had around us and make this work? For example, when you look at the flow chart that we have, those choices, there's a reason those choices are there. Because when we give one consequence or one solution to one student and another student picks something else, what is the one parent going to say? Well, how come my son has to do this and Johnny down the street got to do something else that the parent perceives as easier? Well, those students had the same choices. Parents generally buy into this. They like that you're trying to reach out to students. You may not hit a home run every time you come up with one of these, but you're trying, and parents like that. So do kids. Builds the culture. Okay? So as we go through all of the putting it all together, and I'll just have you click through those really quickly, Aaron. Considerations for learning. Again, this is your lesson plan. These are your objectives. What do you truly want them to learn? And it needs to link back to that culture of character that you develop in your building. Next one, considerations for accountability. Really, again, this is the how, when, where, who, what. Okay? How are they going to do this? That's the creative part. That's the art of this process. And again, like Aaron just talked about, the restoration piece. How are they going to make it right? How will they give back some way, somehow, to the culture of the building? How will they repair damaged relationships? What is that ownership piece that students are going to have? This is the hard part for students, but it's also the most rewarding. Some of the questions that come up, and I'm going to start with just the question that came from the voice in the back of the room a little bit earlier. The whole regular ed versus special ed piece. This is just, it's sound practice. That's what it boils down to. Aaron talked a little bit about research that's out there. Honestly, if you're a Twitter person, look at our Twitter page or whatever you call that, at Solar Behaviors. There's a whole bunch of articles that we post on there that show some of the data from around the country on zero tolerance, showing it doesn't work. Looking at traditional discipline, it's not working in a lot of places. There's a ton of evidence out there. Start talking to people that'll listen in your buildings. Okay? Speaking as an administrator, I know that I'm held accountable for how well my kids do in school. So I know that I have to have a culture that's going to be supportive in order for that to happen. So as a principal, I'm listening. I want to know that. So and I encourage you to frankly, just Google school discipline, and you're going to come up with some things. And truthfully, when we started this journey, it really was directed more at just any kid that got in trouble. Okay? When you look at your data, which is another thing I'd encourage you to do, look at your discipline data, and don't just look at your total number of referrals for your whole population. Split that out. Look at gender. Look at ethnicity. Look at special ed population. Look at everything you have, and look at the trends. You'll see some things that are probably pretty standard across the land. Okay? That's good data to share with staff. So, is it tough enough? You bet it is. If I have a detention, I just sit there for a half hour. If I have a restorative intervention solution that I have to do, not only am I sitting there for a half hour, but I'm working. Okay? It's double the consequence, if you really want to look at it that way. Can it work at all levels? Sure can. You just got to differentiate. Okay? Again, in your packet, there's kind of an implementation guide that we put in there. It gets a little wordy, but I think it's good. It has a lot of information that can at least get you started if you're interested in this stuff. There's also some specific examples for bullying, which is something that we all pay attention to. Time commitment, this is a big question, and this is where I'll kind of start closing things up. Time commitment is big, okay? It takes longer, obviously, it takes more effort for people to do these things. But if we're reducing the overall behaviors that happen in our buildings, you have time for that. Okay? That year, as an assistant principal, that first graph Aaron put up there, I had 220, 225 referrals at the end of the school year. That was the busiest year I ever had as an assistant principal because I was working with those kids and families so often to make sure that we went through these processes. So it does take more time, but it's time well invested. And it also changes the number of infractions that you deal with. From a classroom level, if you're a teacher, try to think of one or two things. The first thing to ask a student all the time, do you want to work it out with me or do you want to work it out with the office? That's their first choice. If they pick you, have one or two things that you're going to put out on the table. Choose one of these. Work it out with me. We'll do that. Let's work together. Let's build a relationship. If that doesn't work out, you kick it to the office. And then we'll take probably whatever you did and add to it to kind of show them they made the right choice by trying to work it out with you first before it comes to the office. So there's a lot of systems, and if you have specific questions about those, let us know and we can try to answer those. So last but not least, the questions that we put up on the beginning of the presentation. Why do we push kids away when they need us most? It's a great question. We don't need to do that. Okay? Don't push them away. Reach out to them and build the connections. What do we do when the damage is done? We can't do that either. Okay? We can't just, sorry, that didn't make any sense. We can't just let the damage happen without trying to fix it. Okay? So the restorative piece is very important for this. And is there a better way? I absolutely, bottom of my heart, think that there is. Is it an easy process? No. Is it a paradigm shift? Absolutely. But it is the right thing to do, and I hope you're seeing some of that right now. Please let us know if you have questions. And I've got a guy standing next to me here that's telling me it's time to come. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul and Aaron. I'd like to implement a restorative practice on Paul right now going on. I need you to study what actually